Hey everybody, welcome back to my Imperial Armada toy box for the final time. Today we're going to finish this toy box adventure and this series. But before I do, I want to let you know that this will be my last video for a while. I'm taking the rest of this month off to enjoy the fall colors and spend some time with Mrs. Toy Box. I'll be back sometime in early October, and I don't have an exact date for you. And I'm not exactly sure yet what I'm going to do when I return. I do have another really cool toy box adventure that I've been working on that I think you're going to like, and I'm really eager to share it. But I also want to continue working on Disneyland, and I've also got about 15 to 20 episodes of toy box tutorials left that I want to do so I can finally finish up that series. So I'll have to come up with a plan for my fall schedule while I'm on my break. One thing I can tell you for certain is that for Halloween, I will be going back to my Disneyland series to do the playthrough and build for the Haunted Mansion. So even if I don't get back to Disneyland before that, we will get there for Halloween. But for today, we're here in my Star Wars toy box, and I'm going to show you how to implement the logic for luring the TIE Fighter patrol pilot to the asteroid here and obtaining the Armada's recognition codes from him, and what happens when you fail to do that. And then we'll put a few little finishing touches on this toy box, and we'll be all done. Now the flow for this little side mission goes like this, and you can watch the playthrough in episode 1 to see this in action, but there's going to be a TIE Fighter circling around up here on patrol, and the player is going to land on this asteroid and set up a distress beacon to lure the pilot. The pilot up here detects the beacon, and when he comes around, he's going to notice there's a TIE Fighter on the asteroid, and he's going to take this little side path here and land on the asteroid to investigate. When the pilot leaves his ship, the player ambushes him and kills him. The pilot drops a data card that contains the Armada recognition codes. The player picks that up, jumps back up in their TIE Fighter, and then they can approach the Armada safely. Without the data card, the Armada will immediately attack when the player approaches it. Now to save some time, I've already placed a number of creativitoys before I started recording, so let me show you those. You can see already there's been some changes since last time, but let's start one at a time. So I've placed 2 vehicle summoners, and you might be wondering why we need 2 vehicle summoners for a single TIE Fighter that's patrolling, and you'll see that in a moment. We also have a time delayer. I've placed a enemy wave generator, an effects generator, 2 locators, a collectible tracker, a replayer, a target camera, and this is lined up with one of those locators that's over there, the one on the left. It's about at that height. The exact placement of this doesn't really matter. I have up here on the mountain a radar marker and another locator, and I've also placed a kiln brazier, and you find this in the decorations drawer. It's from the 2.0 toy box game Escape the Kiln. So I place that there like that. We also have a trigger area that I've created that encompasses the entire fleet. And come over here and just kind of show you the boundary of that. You can see there's some space around the fleet. The little terrain block up there that has a couple of creativitoys on it is also inside this, because I wanted the player, when they approach the fleet, to not get right up to it. This needs to be out a little ways, and it goes up high enough to enclose those higher Star Destroyers up there. And then I have 2 paths, and you can kind of see this path. It's roughly an oval that I've created, and the first point is over here, That's roughly where I've placed that. And it goes in this direction, and I dropped the points down for this. You can see this one comes all the way out here, and this swings around. The next one's over here, kind of opposite of that terrain block there in the middle of the fleet. So this comes out from the asteroid quite a ways, circles around here, and then I have it jutting out over this way a little bit, so it's not a perfect oval, but I wanted it to be kind of moving towards the asteroid. So when the TIE fighter branches off, he goes off in that direction towards the landing strip, and then he kind of circles back around over this way and comes back out this way, and the back end of this oval is out over here. All right, so that's where that is. The second path is over here off of this point. And I basically went forward 2 little nudges and over 1. And that's where this sits. And I wanted it to kind of look like it's really parallel, or very close to parallel to this path. So it doesn't look like he takes an abrupt right turn here to get off the path. I want it to look kind of natural, like he's slightly altering course. This point's just a little bit below, and this path does kind of matter. So let me show you where this is. So it's about 1 nudge below the first point up there, lined up like you see here. And by the way, the first one and the path point that's over here is kind of lined up with the left edge of the asteroid. The next point drops down a little bit. It's lined up here. The next point is down here quite a ways, because now he's descending for a landing. Next point is down here. Just a little ways off the edge of the asteroid there. This next point, here we go. So this kind of tells you where that is, and about the height that we're at. It's about 2 nudges above the surface of the asteroid, enough to clear these rocks. The next point is here, 1 nudge lower. And the last point is right here on the surface of the asteroid. And if you don't get that exact, that's okay. The main thing is you want it to look like the TIE fighter is descending up off of this path, coming down in a nice smooth curve, and then just coming over the edge of this terrain and flattening out about this point to make a nice landing. And you'll also notice I have a logic gate sitting up here near the branching point. And I also want you to notice that I created a second path. I did not create a branch off of this path, because I have no way of telling the circling TIE fighter here when to take the branch and when not to. So that's why I have to have a separate path here. So that's everything we have so far. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is come over to our massive trigger area here. And I'm going to open the logic menu, do a new logic connection when entered by player any. And then we're going to come over to this little terrain block to this logic gate. You'll remember last time we hooked up this logic gate to some Star Destroyers. I only did 2, but as I said last time, you'll hook this up to at least 9 or 10 of these that are not destructible, so that they launch TIE fighters. So the trigger area, when you enter it, is going to go directly to this logic gate and input. So when the player enters the trigger area, we're going to immediately launch TIE fighters off of all of those same ships. All right? So approaching the fleet without getting the recognition code will launch TIE fighters. And the player has to do this little side mission on the asteroid in order to disable that trigger area so they can approach the fleet safely. So to set up the TIE Fighter, let's first come over here to our path. And if we open the properties for our path, I've already set the speed to be 300 and turned the loop property on. The rest of these are fine. You also want to come down to the path point options, and we want to set this to be 250. All right. And then you're going to go to every point along the path and open the properties and set the speed modifier to be 250. Okay, do that for every path point on the path. So this one, all of them on the main path here. For the second path, if we open up the properties for this, I have not set any properties here yet. So once again, the speed, we need to set this to 300, which is the max. We're going to leave this off this time. The rest of these are fine. And again, under the path point options, set this to be 250. And now I am going to set all of these for you because I want you to be aware of how I set my points. So on the next point, we're going to set the speed modifier to this one to be 250 as well, because the player, or the TIE Fighter, is still moving at the same speed when he comes off of his loop. And the same thing for this point. We'll have him moving at the same speed. So the modifier for this will set to 250. And then as he approaches the asteroid from here, we want to start slowing down to get ready for landing. And so on the next point, I'm going to set this one to be 200. All right, so just a gradual slowdown. We're still a little ways out from the asteroid, so we don't want to slow down too much, too fast. Now this one, we are getting close. So on this one, we're going to change the property on this, and we're going to leave this one set to 100. So he'll be moving at the max speed of 300 that we set up there on the property for the path. This one, we're going to set the speed modifier on this one to be 50, which means he'll be moving at 150 speed. That's half of what we set on the path. For this one, we're going to set this to be 25. So he'll be moving at 75 when he hits that. And then for the last path point here, I'm going to set this one to be 20. You don't want it moving too much slower than that. Okay, so he'll come in rather quick and then start slowing down and move in here nice and slow to make a landing. So that's what we want. All right, for the first vehicle summoner, if we open up the properties for this and go into the generated vehicle options, we're going to set the first flag, orient along the path, to true, because we want the TIE Fighter to look like it's circling the path. And the rest of the properties are fine. And notice the movement style is set to loop. That's the default, and that's what we want, because we want him to be circling that path up there. And then on this same vehicle summoner, we're going to do a new path connection. And we're going to connect it up to our circling path. Which is this one. Okay, so that's where the TIE Fighter will go when we generate it. And because the auto start flag is on, it'll start moving around that path right away. So now on the level starter, we're going to do a new logic connection on Catalyze. We'll come over to the Vehicle Summoner, and under Rise Against the Empire, we're going to generate the TIE Fighter. So when the toy box loads, we're going to put that out there, and it'll immediately start circling that path. Okay. Now, to get the TIE Fighter to come down here, we want the player to set up a distress beacon up here on the mountain. And for that, we're going to use this Kiln Brazier. And to direct the player up here, we need a radar marker. So that's why we have this. So on the radar marker, we're going to do a new locator connection. Connect that up to this locator. And on the radar marker properties, the beacon type is going to be a yellow arrow. Beacon location will be the locator. And we want this active by default when the player enters the toy box. And in a moment, we'll move that locator underneath the brazier, but we have to make some logic connections on that, so we don't want to do that just yet. Now, when the player makes their way up to the mountain and approaches the brazier, this will automatically turn itself on. And you'll notice there's a logic menu for this with some logic connections. And so when it's turned on, we can do some things. So we're going to do a new logic connection. When this brazier is turned on, we're going to do several different things. First thing I want to do is turn off this radar marker. And I'd also like to play a sound, and I'm going to do a beeping sound, and I want it to beep a couple of times so that the player knows this thing is active. So on the brazier, a new logic connection. When this is turned on, we'll come down to our sound effect generator. And under the general category, we're going to use the beeping sound. And again, I want to do this a couple of times, so that's why we have the time delayer here. And I'm going to set the properties on this to be 4 seconds. The sound effect's about 2 seconds. So it'll be 2 seconds and then a 2-second delay. And then we want it to play that sound again. So on our brazier, it's difficult to select this when it's sitting on the mountain, but we'll do a new logic connection when this is turned on. Come over to our time delayer and start the delay. And on the time delayer, new logic connection when the delay is completed. Come over to our sound generator, and under the general category, we'll play the beeping sound again. Okay. And there's one more thing we're going to do, because we want the TIE Fighter now to land. So on this, we're going to do a new logic connection when this is turned on, this brazier. We're going to come out here to our logic gate. And we're going to open it. And I want this gate to be closed by default. So we need to come over to our level starter and close this gate. So on the level starter, new logic connection on Catalyze. We'll come up and close this logic gate. All right, so what we're going to do is on this point, we're going to make a logic connection here, and we need the TIE Fighter, once that brazier is active, once the distress beacon is active, we want the TIE Fighter to move to this path and go into its landing sequence. The trouble is, I don't want that to happen until the player actually activates that distress beacon. So that's why we're using the logic gate there. So on this point, this path point, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the point is reached by the object on the path, we're going to attempt to input into this gate. Now the level starter is going to close this gate by default. So initially when the TIE fighter comes past here and hits this point, it'll try to go into this gate, but the gate's going to be closed and nothing will happen. But once we activate the distress beacon, that opens the gate. And so on this logic gate, we'll do a new logic connection on output. We're going to come over to the second path here. We're going to scroll down and we're going to connect the triggering actor to that path. All right. So this will not output when the gate is closed. So before that distress beacon is active, the TIE fighter will attempt to go through the gate to jump over to this path. The gate's going to be closed, which means this will never happen. So the TIE fighter will continue along this same path, and it'll keep circling on this path until this gate is open. And after the gate is opened, when the TIE fighter gets to this point, it attempts to input into the logic gate. Now it can output because the gate is open, and it'll connect the TIE fighter to this path. And the TIE fighter will continue now moving along this path and heading toward the asteroid. So far, so good. Now, when the TIE fighter gets down to this last point, we have a little problem because this path is not looped. But the property on this vehicle summoner is set to loop. And I have no way to change this with a logic connection. So what that means is when the TIE fighter reaches this point, it's going to jump back up to the start of that path and start the landing sequence all over again, which is bad. And so that's why we have a second vehicle summoner in here. So on this path point, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the point is reached by the object on the path, okay, what we want to have happen is a few things. The main one being the fact that we want to take this TIE fighter out. And we're going to put one in its place that's just sitting here at this point. That's why we have the second vehicle summoner. And so we're going to do a new logic, or not a new logic, we're going to do a new locator connection on this second vehicle summoner, and we're going to connect it up to this locator. In a moment, I'll move that to be right over top of that path point. But for right now, we have several logic connections to make, and so moving it at this point will be a problem. But this is going to be sitting here. So when the TIE fighter lands and it approaches this, it's going to disappear and be replaced by a TIE fighter that's going to sit at this location. Okay? So hopefully that's pretty clear. So on this path point, we've already removed the landing TIE fighter. So we're going to do a new logic connection. When the point is reached by the object on the path, we're going to come over to our second vehicle summoner and generate a new TIE fighter. This one will be generated at this locator, and it will just be sitting there. And it's going to be facing where that little blue dot is facing. So we need to make sure that this locator is facing that way. And it is. Okay. All right. And then the other thing our path point needs to do is kick off our enemy wave generator. So on this, we're going to do a new logic connection. When the point is reached by the object on the path, we will invoke our enemy wave generator to generate the wave. And I have not set that up yet, but that's what that's going to do. And that's everything this path point needs to do. So now we can take this locator and move this on top of that point. And that will look pretty good, except for one small problem. And that is when it reaches this, it will disappear for a moment, and a new TIE fighter will appear in its place. And so to cover up that a little bit so it's not quite so jarring. We're going to do a visual effect here. So I'm going to move this locator a little bit closer. Yeah, we'll just leave it here. I think actually is fine. I don't think we need to have this to be too close, because we're going to do some large area smoke over top of this that will kind of cover this up a little bit. So on this effect generator, we'll do a new locator connection. Connect up to this locator. And I want to start the smoke when the TIE fighter reaches this point, because it's going to take a moment to get the smoke going. So on this point, new logic connection, when the point is reached by the object on the path, we'll come over here to our effects generator. We're going to play one time out of the smoke category, the large area smoke. And by the time the TIE fighter reaches this point, the smoke will be going full board, and it'll be at its thickest, and that'll kind of help hide the fact that the TIE fighter vanishes. You're still going to see it. I can't hide it entirely, but it will cover that up a little bit. And it also adds a nice effect that when the TIE fighter is landing, it's stirring up the dust here on the asteroid surface. So that smoke kind of has a dual purpose. It looks good, and it hides some of the ugliness. All right, for our enemy wave generator. Actually, before I get to that, let me double check here. Yeah, everything is done on the brazier. So before I forget, let's go ahead and move this locator here. And we'll put that underneath the brazier so that that radar marker is sitting on top of it. Okay, now to the enemy wave generator. We're going to connect up to this same locator, spawn location, and I think I will move this a little bit closer to that TIE fighter. Don't want it too close though. I think that's probably fine. And let's move this target camera to line that up with that locator. Alright, on the enemy wave generator, we're going to configure the wave, and I'll actually do this one for you. And we want to use the Imperial pilot. And one of him is all we need, because there's only one in a TIE fighter. And for the properties on the enemy wave generator, I'm going to leave the generation delay set at 4. We will disable the generation effect, because once the TIE fighter stops, we want to give a moment for the pilot to leave the ship. So we'll go ahead and leave that set the way it is. And all the rest of these properties are fine. Actually, we can go ahead and leave that off. That's how I set that originally. Okay, so the pilot emerges, and then the player has to defeat him. And when the player defeats him, we want to put the data card out here. And so for that, we're going to use the replayer. Again, I would love to use the loot drop manager, but that just doesn't work with the collectible tracker. And now for the key card on this, if we come to the gameplay toys drawer, we go right from the vehicle summoner. I'm going to scroll over and find the collectibles. I'm going to use this key card collectible, and I'm not going to place it, I just want to get the drawer to that point. So once again, we will step on this replayer. On my Wii U, I press B to start recording, and then I have to step off to get back into the editor. We're going to place this right about in this area. We'll put it actually right on top of here. Exit out of the editor, step on the replayer, press B to stop recording, A to clear. Alright, so on the enemy wave generator, a new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, we're going to do two things. We're going to play back on the replayer. And on the enemy wave generator, new logic connection. When the wave is defeated, we want to turn on our target camera to show the player where that keycard is. Because I don't want to assume that the player is going to be over here battling him. By the time the player gets down off the mountain, they could come down this way and be battling him, and the TIE fighter might block that. So the camera will show them that there's an object there to pick up. Alright, on the target camera, we're going to do a new locator connection. We can connect up to this same locator and reuse that. And on the camera properties, we're going to use a defined duration of 5 seconds. These are fine. Glow through will turn off. Camera target needs to be the connected locator. And all of the rest of these properties are fine. So after 5 seconds, the camera will automatically turn itself off. Now when the player picks up the collectible tracker will keep track of that. So on the collectible tracker, on the properties, for the collectible type, we're using the keycard collectible, not the kiln one. There we go, keycard collectible. And we can show that on the radar. So when the player picks the keycard up, the collectible tracker will do a new logic connection. When the final collectible is collected, we will come out here to our trigger area and deactivate it. And then the player can hop back in the TIE fighter and approach the fleet without it launching TIE fighters. And so that is the logic for luring the pilot down and getting the recognition code from him for the Armada. All right, just a couple more things we want to do. At this point, you can move all of these creativitoys down into the hidden compartment that we built down here inside the asteroid. You can put all of these things down here and hide them under here. Do that for all of the creativitoys that are up here on the surface. Do that for all of the creativitoys that are out here. So this logic gate, the two creativitoys that are up on this terrain block, you want to move those out of the way. And then you can delete this piece of terrain because you won't need that anymore. And you also want to move all of the creativitoys for the Star Destroyers. And you'll notice with this trigger area in place, it's going to be really hard to do that. So maybe before this episode starts, and before you put down this trigger area, you want to move all of those creativitoys from the individual Star Destroyers out of there and put them down inside that little hidden area inside the asteroid. Because that'll make your job a lot easier. Because as you saw, once I put the trigger area up, it's really hard to find those because you're so zoomed out. And then once you do that, the last thing you need to do is pick up the start pad and move that to its starting position. And we're going to bring this up kind of a little bit above the level of the mountain there, sort of level with the fleet. And we're going to back this thing way out here. And I want to put this out here kind of midway on the fleet. And way, 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 way out here. so that the player kind of sees the asteroid and the fleet and the entire toy box from here, and they can decide where to go. Of course, this is going to jump me back here, so we're going to have to come back out here and find that start pad. There it is. And I want to set the properties on the start pad, in case you didn't know you can do this. And I want to turn the visible display off. So you can see it while you're here in the editor, but when the player enters this toy box and they're flying the TIE Fighter, you don't want this start pad to be visible. So the toy box loads and the player starts here and begins flying in this direction in their TIE Fighter. They'll see the one circling there, they'll see the fleet, they'll see this asteroid. Hopefully they'll see the radar marker on their radar and come over here and land. And with that, this toy box is now finished, and so is this series. I hope you've enjoyed it. Leave a comment before you go to let me know what you think of it now that you've seen the entire build process and the logic for it. And once again, for those of you who are building this toy box on your own systems, I want to remind you that I have logic diagrams on my blog to help you out. The link is in the video description. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, be sure to do that so you don't miss my new episodes when I return. That's all for me today. Take care.